Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're specifically going to talk about the question, should Dungeon Masters play injured? All right, so for a weird set of events, the Garibay family watched the Super Bowl. This is incredibly unusual. I have a son, and he's becoming very, very serious about playing soccer at a high level, like really excelling at it and trying to pursue it and be good at it. So the Garibays are trying to sport up, and so we ended up watching the Super Bowl, and I was pretty stunned with something that one of the commentators, the NFL commentator, said during the game. I was shocked by this statement. So Matthew Stafford is a world-class quarterback, NFL quarterback, and he brought the LA Rams to victory in Super Bowl 56. This made my family very unhappy because we were all rooting for the Cincinnati Bengals. It's hard to see winners win and losers lose. It was rough. I really felt for the Cincinnati Bengals. They've never won a Super Bowl, and it was tough to see them lose again, and LA Rams get another Super Bowl title, and winners continue to win and losers continue to lose. Right? Like it's rough. It's rough. All right, so here's what the NFL commentator said. It was shocking. I couldn't believe he said it. He's like, Matthew Stafford gets like sacked. And he's like, well, boy, it looks like could be an injury there. And he's like, but that's not going to be a problem because he says, and he literally said, he says, Matthew Stafford has a long history of powering through injuries. And I was like, wait, what? Did you just say that a major quarterback routinely, right, routinely actually plays through physical injuries, right? And I was like, that's exactly what the commentator said. I was like, that doesn't seem healthy, like, but I'm watching it, he's saying it, and he's like, this has happened again and again, right? So it brings up, so here's the supposition, right? According to official NFL commentator, right, because we were watching it on Peacock, right, it is not uncommon for American football players to play through physical injuries, right? In fact, he was saying that Matthew Stafford has a history of it, right? Like of playing through injuries, right? And I was like, okay, well, wait. So American football players are like, a football game is worth me risking the long-term health of my body, right? What does that mean for Dungeon Masters, right? I was like, okay. So let's talk this through. All right, so first of all, what kind of injury would a Dungeon Master sustain? Well, I can tell you right now, you could sustain a lot of physical injuries and be just fine Dungeon Mastering. So physical injuries really aren't the question here, right? One of the things that we now in 2022 realize is health is not just physical health, it's also mental health, right? So I do not think that mental health is more important than physical health, but I don't think it's less important than physical health. So Dungeon Masters need to make sure that they're physically healthy and that they're mentally healthy. And it's far more likely that a Dungeon Master would suffer a mental health injury, right? Like they'd be like, oh, this life event happened, now my mental health, I'm injured, right? And they, and I think I can definitely, tell when I'll tell you right now, I think that the March 2020 world has dealt me a mental health injury, right? Like I feel like, like when your knee hurts, you're like, oh boy, I can feel my knee hurts, something ain't right down there. Like this plague world, I think has, well, I don't need to say I think this. You can just go to the New York Times and they'll tell you mental health issues are absolutely massively skyrocketing because of the March 2020 issue. It's like across every gender, every wealth class, every it doesn't matter what the parameters are, it's just going through the roof, right? Like, so, and I'm no different. Like I feel more mentally, I don't feel as mentally sound as I did before before the March 2020, right? And so I'm managing that as best I can, right? So the question is, if a Dungeon Master suffers a mental health injury, should they continue to play? All right, so let's talk this through. All right, so for American football, gridiron football, right, it looks like lots of professional players are like, I'm injured, I keep playing, right? Now, why would they do that, right? Like, well, what's on the line, right? For them, I think they don't want to let down their teammates, right? Well, Dungeon Masters have the same thing, right? Like, we have a team, right? Like, we have players who rely on us, right? And so we are like American football players in that we have a team that relies on us, right? What's at stake, right? Well, for American football, there can be monetary issues at stake. There can be honor issues at stake. Like there's a big rivalry between. I know so little about football, but I know that like the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles, there's a tradition of honor in those games. And like when we play, when Philadelphia Eagles play the Dallas Cowboys, they like want to destroy that team, right? And the reason why is the rivalry there is epic and historical. Like it is not just a regular game, right? It is very, very adamant. Like it's intense and adamant, right? Like intense and adamant rivalry. So there's honor and tradition at stake, right? We definitely, and there's also legacy at stake, right? Like there are legacy victories and defeats, right? We absolutely have legacy, and we also have. So we absolutely have and that's another. Yeah, I think there's another issue is, I think it's a tradition in American football to play, right? Like, oh, you have some obstacles, you have to overcome this or that. And injury is an obstacle. We're just going to power through, and there's a tradition, there's a legacy, right, of rough and tumble persistence, right? For us, we have a legacy too, right? We play Dungeons and Dragons to carry forward the legacy of Gary Gygax. He's an American hero, right? He invented this thing. Tabletop role-playing games did not exist before him. It is a badge of honor for Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and for America, right? We invented this. Like, this is Americana, and it has spread to the entire world, right? Like, I don't think there's a continent on the planet where Dungeons and Dragons has not been played, right? And so we have this legacy, right? So we have a legacy just like they do. And we have a team that we don't want to let down just like they do, right? So if it's okay to, if there are people who are just literally widely acknowledging that American football is worth playing through an injury for, is Dungeons and Dragons worth playing through an injury for? It's tough. It's a tough question. Here is my thought, okay? I'm going to tell you what I think. But I will tell you what I know, right? I'll tell you, this is right and this is wrong. Here I'm not saying this. I'm saying this is what I think now, and I'm inviting correction. One, I'll say it flat out. I'll tell you right now, the stakes on an American football game are massively lower than any kitchen table Dungeons and Dragons game, right? And the reason why is American football is a physical activity, right? Physical activities are less and less valuable every single day in our world, right? They're worth, like, quite literally worth less, right? Like no one is paying more for physical labor, and like it is becoming increasingly less important, especially in America as we move toward this knowledge worker world, right? So basically I think there was less at stake on the Super Bowl last night than there was if you go to Wichita, Kansas, and Sally is running a game for her 4 friends. There's less at stake for the Super Bowl than there is for her. And the reason why is she's carrying forward the legacy of Gary Gygax, and she is making an incredibly personal story that is going to be remembered forever by each and every one of them, and has real ability to impact their lives, right? The lessons they can learn there about morality, because alignment's in the game. The lessons they can learn about identity, because race, class, gender, preference are all part of the game, right? The ramifications of how that story that they craft together and how it can change each person at the table is massively more important than what does American football change for anybody? I have no idea. Like, nothing of significance in my opinion, right? So the stakes at a single kitchen table game in Wichita, Kansas are 100 times greater than everything that happened at the Super Bowl last night, right? Like, so I think we're in the same boat, right? Like, we have to, I think a dungeon master is in exactly the same situation as Matthew Stafford, right? He's like, There's things that are important for me on the line here. I need to check myself and understand how deep this injury is, but I have goals to accomplish. So I think if it's okay to do it for something as massively unimportant as American football, I think it might be okay to do it for Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, you have to know yourself. You have to know how deep the mental health injury is, right? And you have to know what the stakes are at your table. But to me, if it's okay for American football, and there's literally a widely, openly discussed public tradition of powering through injuries for something as unimportant as American football, then definitely I think every Dungeon Master should at least be saying, okay, I got a mental health injury, and I'm aware of it, but people are relying on me, and there's real stakes at this table, right? So I don't think it's any less acceptable for a Dungeon Master to power through a mental health injury as it is for an American football player to power through for what is clearly much less significant stakes. That's my opinion, right? That's what I think now, right? But I also know that there's probably some things about mental health that I might learn, right? So I'm more than willing to hear anybody who has any expertise in this. Also, if you have more knowledge than I have in American football, which would not be difficult, and the stakes are different for American football than I just said, I'm willing to hear all of that. So I just stated my opinion, which is formed on the knowledge I have now. I'm ready to change that if I get more knowledge in the comments section, or if anybody points me to a good source that I can review. All that's my opinion. I'm curious of your opinion. What do you think? Do you think Dungeon Masters should consider powering through a mental health injury in order to deliver for the responsibility and the legacy that Dungeons & Dragons has, and specifically for their team? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.